Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
The brain were basically showed that the part of the brain that sounds the alarm and says, "Hey, wait, a spider!" That part of the brain, when it sounds the alarm, that part of the brain that does the work to resolve the fear, the brain is just wired so that part of the brain, for people who know about the brain, it's the prefrontal cortex, it just becomes less active because the energy, call it the processing energy, is shifted to the part of the brain sounding the alarm. The way I think about it is if you're in the jungle walking down a path and a tiger jumps out in front of you, your job is to survive. And so the parts of the brain that have to do with survival, those are the parts that get very active. The parts of the brain that figure out what this fear is about and help you to resolve it, they're on the shelf until you find some way to get away from this time.
What if your emotional life didn't have to feel like a constant reaction or a constant recovery? Welcome to the International Awareness Integration Institute Virtual Clinic, a global online clinic offering psychotherapy, coaching, integrative well-being services, and mind-body practices, all in one place. At International Awareness Integration Institute, we don't just talk about change, we train it. Our work is guided by awareness integration theory, an evidence-based psychological and educational model designed to reduce anxiety and depression patterns, strengthen emotional regulation, and help you build a life that feels meaningful, steady, and fulfilling. Whether you're navigating stress, relationship strain, burnout, life transitions, trauma symptoms, or simply the feeling that you've outgrown your old life, you'll find a clear path forward here, supported by licensed professionals and expert practitioners. If you're ready to feel better, think clearer, and live fully, join the International Awareness Integration Institute Virtual Clinic today. Visit awarenessintegration.com and book your first session or join our membership. Introducing a powerful new update from the Foojan app. Now with flexible subscription plans to fit your journey monthly, quarterly, or yearly. Our new AI-driven onboarding customizes your path to feeling better, faster, and enjoy a refreshed experience with stunning 3D interactive videos. Update now. Empower your inner voice with Foojan. Download today. Welcome to the Inner Voice, a Heartfelt Chat podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist and author and the originator and the founder of the International Awareness Integration Institute. So today I'm excited because I am talking to Dr. Philip Manfield. He's the developer of the FLASH technique. It's an intervention that permits the processing of trauma virtually painlessly. Yes, I say it again. Processing of trauma virtually painlessly. This was developed in 2016 for the use in preparation of a phase of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing protocols, which is really a technique that works for releasing trauma. And it makes it possible that the processing of extremely disturbing memories that clients might have otherwise be unwilling to be able to be addressed. So in the past 6 years, it has become evidence-based with 24 published papers supporting its effectiveness. Now, together with his colleagues, they have presented introductions to FLASH technique at 8 national and international conferences, conducted webinars and workshops in 11 countries, and trained over 24,000 clinicians. So if you are a clinician, go to flashtechnique.com and learn about it and see how you could be trained. If you're someone who's interested, you could definitely go to flashtechnique.com and get the research and find out about some of the clinicians. And it's really fascinating. And I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I have. Now be sure to subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube channel. and connect with me through my website, FoojanZeine.com. Connect with us through the Foojan app, which you can go through 31 areas of your life, and go through guided journaling, through the awareness integration theory. Also, you can have a chat with Mira, which is an AI chatbot, which is trained in the awareness integration theory. So I'll say, AI meets AI. So that way you'll experience any questions that you have through Mira, and it's a safe chatbot that it can answer your questions of what is important in your life. Share your thoughts with me. I love to hear from you. Now, without further ado, here's Dr. Philip Manfield.
Listen up if you want to promote your personal growth and self-awareness. I found the Foojan app last month and I have been absolutely loving it. I personally have never learned guided meditation, but thanks to this app, I now have learned incredible tools for my own stress relief and emotional self-awareness. Not to mention, there are self-evaluation tools and professional coaching available to utilize however your journey to self-discovery takes you. Join Foojan today and redefine your life one step at a time.
If you've been doing your best, but still feel stuck in anxiety, relationship stress, or the weight of old patterns, this is where things begin to shift. At the Awareness Integration Institute Virtual Clinic, we offer something different. We provide two pathways forward. In psychotherapy, our licensed clinicians help heal unresolved trauma, reduce anxiety and depression, and navigate life transitions. In coaching, our certified coaches help you build confidence, leadership, and relationship mastery, turning insight into decisive action. Both are guided by Dr. Foojan Zaine's evidence-based awareness integration theory, a structured roadmap from awareness to integration to action. During our summit, save 25% on all services from March 22nd through 29th. Visit awarenessintegration.com to book your first session or request to be matched with the right provider. I'm so excited to have Dr. Philip Manfield with us. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You are the developer of Flash Technique. For people who don't know what that is, I request from you to first share about how you developed it, where did it come from, and what was your inspiration to create this type of technique?
Okay. Well, I was an EMDR therapist for starting with its introduction in 1991, and there's an organization that represents EMDR therapists in the United States called EMDR, and they have a conference once a year, and I was going to present at the conference, and I was presenting the work of a woman in Canada, and Christina Kanowski, and she's a psychologist in Vancouver Island, and she's one of a lot of people who tried to solve a problem that is inherent in EMDR, and that is, in EMDR, people are asked to focus on something that they want to work on that's very disturbing. And that's just fine if it's I dropped the dishes when I was 5 years old and my mother yelled at me and I felt terrible. But some of those events that we work on are really horrible.
Yes.
Events. And
before you say that, just to share with people who might not know what EMDR is, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which was developed by Dr. Francine Shapiro, and it has a specific mechanism, and I'm hoping that we kind of delve into how that works also, as well as your Flash technique. That is really trauma informed and is set up to release the trauma from almost, I would say, even from your cellular body. It's not just, yes, it works with your kind of the neuroplasticity of the brain. So I just
Shapiro called it a somatic therapy. So she thought of as a body therapy.
Yes. My experience has also been very much, it's definitely, I know that I was trained by Shapiro, and at one point I decided to do more of the tapping on the knees versus just going with the eyes. And then she kind of scolded me like, no, you got to do this with the eyes. So there's something around definitely the eye movement, and then, you know, also the whole somatic. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but because I wanted to first say for people what EMDR is, so as they're listening to you, they have an idea. Please continue.
You know, when I teach, I always have other people teaching with me, and we interrupt each other, and that's what I'm used to. So it's perfectly fine. So the problem is, how do you do EMDR with someone who has a horrendous memory that is overwhelming for them? And if we ask them to focus on it, they're going to get overwhelmed. They may dissociate. They may just refuse, or they may just start sobbing uncontrollably. And so when Shapiro developed EMDR, she didn't have that kind of intense trauma in mind. And so after I was trained for many years, I was looking for the solution to that problem. And the best solution I found was Christina's solution, which was that she had people think of a positive photo, and then she had them hold that photo in mind, and then rather than think about the disturbing memory, she had them just go to the edge of it and then come back to the photo and do that repeatedly until they could think of more and more of the disturbing
a little bit
memory.
Like desensitization, right? This is what we also do in desensitization, that we go to the side of it, come back until the person can really contain that concept.
Yeah, I think what she did was an adaptation of Peter Levine, who does a trauma treatment that's that involves going back and forth like that. Only he's actually not a therapist. I think he's a sociologist, but he developed this approach, and then he got good at doing it, and so he's a very interesting speaker to hear, and his demonstrations are very interesting. But she adapted that to EMDR, and I started doing it because it worked better than anything else I'd seen around. And so I was doing that. And the problem is that when people do Christina's protocol, the clients often experience relief, not just desensitization. And back then in the EMDR world, and I'm not sure about now, but back then, nobody who had an approach that brought relief was welcome in the EMDR world unless it was EMDR. And so she was sort of frozen out of the EMDR world. She wasn't invited to do presentations, and nobody knew about her. I knew about her because I am the coordinator for the San Francisco Bay Area, and I spoke to her and invited her to come down and show us what she did, which she did, actually multiple times. So I was slated to, I applied to present her her titration approach. Titration is sort of weakening of a disturbing memory, making it less disturbing, and then processing it in that less disturbing form, then going back to the original. That's what EMDR therapists were doing for many years. It was the best solution they had to this problem, and it was disappointing to me that no one was doing Christina's protocol, because it was quite an elaborate protocol, and it was good. And she had made a bunch of videos of doing this with clients. And when she came down, she did a full-length program down here and showed quite a few videos, and they were very impressive. And she's also a lovely person. I mean, it's just so sad that she was excluded from the EMDR world. So I thought I would present her material and get her to be known in the EMDR world, and I was going to do that as at an EMDR conference. So I was preparing to do that, and I started to wonder, because her protocol involves just touching on the disturbance, coming back to something positive, going back and forth like that. I thought, well, how much disturbance is necessary? How much does a person have to become disturbed in order for this to work? And so I started with my clients, I started experimenting with having them go in a briefer and briefer way to becoming exposed to the disturbance. And even to the point of touching on the trauma so briefly that they didn't feel any disturbance. And I was really surprised that I started seeing treatment effects that I had never seen before. And so it seemed that to cut off the trauma exposure as much as possible caused more change to happen. And
so it's the disruption. What I'm hearing from you is that there's a disruption happens, because every time, the research says that every time we go back into a memory, we're changing the structure of the memory. So
except for trauma memories.
Except for trauma memories. But if we even look at it from that trauma memory, it's still a memory. What I'm hearing from you is saying that when you go to it very quickly and then switch it back to the positive memory, that at that moment there is a disturbance that happens to that memory and re-updates that memory until the intensity is no longer there.
You're beyond me. I don't know. That's a technical explanation, and it may be accurate. After we started doing the flash technique, so the flash technique became an outgrowth of this realization. I said to myself, well, what if we do a process that discourages the client from becoming disturbed at all? And I experimented with that, and I got incredible results. And I told some colleagues about it, and they all ended up calling me a few days later saying, oh, I tried it, it's incredible. So it felt like, wow, we've got something here. And one of my colleagues called and said, this is amazing. If you don't write a paper about this, someone else will. And so I twisted her arm and said, well, okay, I'll write a paper if you contribute a case report. And my brother, psychologist in Portland, and my colleague Louis Engel submitted case reports. So we did this paper with 4 case reports. We just catch my thread here because and then after we started teaching Flash, one of our colleagues showed us a paper that he'd found, and it was written by Paul Siegel, who's a psychologist in New York, and his paper seemed to confirm everything that we believed about Flash. What he had done was he took 2 groups of people who were terribly afraid of spiders, arachnophobes. And one group watched a screen and a hairy old spider was flashed on the screen repeatedly, and they reacted. And after a while, they reacted less and less. So it was what we call exposure therapy.
Yes.
And the second group did exactly the same thing, except when the spider was flashed on the screen, it was flashed so quickly that they did not know they had seen a spider. Now, both groups benefited from this exposure phenomenon. Both groups became less afraid of spiders. But lo and behold, the group who didn't know they had seen a spider were significantly more improved in their spider phobia.
Wow.
And he's published 14 papers at this point. And the third or fourth paper was an fMRI study in which he took functional magnetic resonance and he watched people's brains as they went through this same experiment that he initially did. And what he found was that people who knew they saw a spider and had a fear response or a fight or flight response, the part of the brain that processes phobia and resolves it, that part of the brain was kind of numbed out. It wasn't very active, and so there wasn't strong resolution of the spider phobia. But the group that didn't know they'd seen a spider, that part of the brain wasn't numbed out. It was actually more active. And so their phobia got more resolved. And so our...
Now, what you're sharing is just a very short exposure, but there's also... are they also showing like a positive picture, or is just a very short flash?
It's a short flash repeated over and over again.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that when there's a research that was done between just regular exposure therapy, which you're exposed for a significant amount of time or amount of time, where possibly it showed in the brain that for the fear or the phobia or whatever activation happens, that the brain numbs itself, like it can't handle it, so it kind of numbs itself. But when it's very, very short flashes, it seems like the brain holds it, understands it, gets it, but then starts getting activated. So the result has been that they're getting that part of their brain is releasing a lot of that intensity much more.
Well, your explanations are very interesting. They aren't the way I think about it, but they're plausible. The fMRI studies of the brain basically showed that the part of the brain that sounds the alarm and says, "Hey, wait, a spider!" That part of the brain, when it sounds the alarm, that part of the brain that does the work to resolve the fear, the brain is just wired so that part of the brain, for people who know about the brain, it's the prefrontal cortex, it just becomes less active because the energy, call it the processing energy, is shifted to the part of the brain sounding the alarm. The way I think about it is if you're in the jungle walking down a path and a tiger jumps out in front of you, your job is to survive. And so the parts of the brain that have to do with survival, those are the parts that get very active. The parts of the brain that figure out what this fear is about and help you to resolve it, they're on the shelf until you find some way to get away from this tiger.
Right, it's a secondary concept.
Yeah.
And you're saying that when the pictures are showed up in the exposure therapy, it activates the part of the brain for survival, but it doesn't, obviously, the part of the brain that is doing the reflection and releasing goes into kind of dormant.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
When you do the flashes, which are so quick that are just subconscious picks it up, but then it doesn't necessarily hold the visual consciousness for a long time. It doesn't activate the survival, fight or flight, and therefore the brain goes into processing it and therefore releasing it.
Really resolves it. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And you know, he did he obviously 14 papers, a lot of papers. And he experimented to see if what happens if he shows someone a picture that is a flower, but it resembles a spider. And he found basically that this fight or flight response seemed, whenever that alarm was sounded, the prefrontal cortex became less active. And so that connection became very clear. And in our work, someone has a trauma that they want to work on, and we say, that's great, stop thinking about it. You know, we want you to think about something positive and engaging. And if it's engaging, you won't be thinking about this disturbing thing. And then, as in Siegel's work, if you're not thinking about the disturbing thing, the prefrontal cortex will become more active and you'll get resolution. And so basically that's flash technique.
Mm-hmm. But when I saw your demonstration, there was also the concept of holding your hand in a particular way, you know, shutting your eyes back and forth and flickering. There was something you added to this concept of just flashing very quickly the person is afraid of, because so this would be a phobia where you could do it from outside. But if someone has been in a robbery, someone has been in an accident, someone has been abused in a particular way, we don't have something from outside to show them in order, you know, to create that. There's an experience that happened inside that, you know, if I just showed them another picture, might not relate to what they experienced, because when somebody had a trauma, they made some sense of a meaning out of it, right? The visual part that they even held, whether it was a visual or auditory or olfactory, something that, or
all the above.
Yeah, all the above. They picked up whatever they picked up. So it's hard for anybody to say, oh, I'll assume it looks like this and then flash it for you. So we still have to go to the, like you said, to the edge of whatever it is, and then come back and distract it, and edge of the, and that's what I heard from you when we go through the internal trauma processes and not
right. But what we believe, I mean, it started out, we had people go to the edge. That was the original protocol.
Yes.
Then we realized that we were having them do it so rapidly. Why have them do it at all? Because they weren't actually experiencing the trauma when they went to it. So we stopped having them do it at all, and we just said, we're going to say flash, and when we say flash, you just do this. You just blink 3, 4, 5 times.
So,
and so that
distraction, would that be more like you're distracted?
It's a bit of distraction, but I think of it as a reminder, because people get into talking about their cat and their, and the tricks that their dog does and so on, and, they get really engaged.
Right.
And they sort of forget that they're processing some very disturbing memory. And we want them to not be thinking about the disturbing memory, but if they completely forget it, then it doesn't seem to do the job. We have to have some kind of reminder that, hey, we're having a good time here, but we're also processing that thing that happened to you 5 years ago. And so the blinking if nothing else, it seems to remind the client that we're in this trauma processing process. I really think of it as flash is a subconscious process. It operates outside of consciousness, and even though the client is talking about their puppy and all the tricks it does, and if you ask them, were you thinking about the assault that happened when you were talking about your puppy? They'd say, no, I was talking about Fido and his tricks. And but our evidence is that even though they don't know that Fido is an issue, that the assault is an issue here, it is. I mean, there's a part of memory that we kind of control consciously and we monitor consciously, but there's an even bigger part that it's just happening in the background. I mean, at my age, I have the experience, not infrequently, where I just can't think of a name. And I've learned that it's a waste of time to just really pound away at that name because it doesn't come up. But if I get distracted and get involved in something else, all of a sudden up pops the name. And so I wouldn't, if you asked me, I wouldn't say, oh yeah, my brain's still working on that name. I don't have any awareness that that's happening, but it has to be happening because the name pops up, and so that's what's happening with Flash.
So there's an intentionality into it because you're saying, I want to know what that name is. I can't find it, but then you go to something else, and then your brain, due to that promotion of intentionality, it seems like it already goes forward for that task, even though you're not necessarily paying attention to it, it already goes. So part of whether the memory is something like a phobia or something that has happened, if the person comes to us as a therapy because it's up here to the present moment for them. So it shows up as the present moment for them. So as they're coming, what you're suggesting and how the research shows is that as they come in with the process and the intention is the process of that memory, these different types of distractions, so whether it's a positive picture or a visual, or it's shutting and opening the eye very quickly as a flash, any of those type of intentional transitions and shifting your attention, then it shows up as, if it shows up again, if it brings up again for them, you do it again. If it shows up again for them, you do it again. So there's a way that the brain processes this distraction and subconsciously processes the intensity of the trauma or whatever meaning they gave it. And
exactly.
How do we know is that when after a while you ask specifically if, go back to the trauma, or is there anything, they're like, there's nothing showing up. So is that how?
Or there's less.
Or is less. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, there's also the process where the trauma is not here right now. However, there's some behavioral pattern that has happened, or there's a core belief, there's a belief, a negative belief that is happening, or we're watching and, a pattern of reactivity that shows up consistently. And then we could, as we're working on the way these patterns and reactions, we lead it to, or we see that it was created due to a trauma, right? So,
yeah, that's right. And I over time, I used to refer to trauma. That's all, because I was doing EMDR for 25 years. So I always refer to it as a treatment of trauma. But in fact, any memory where when you think of it, you're like back there again, reliving it, any memory like that is an excellent target for this processing and can get resolved. The resolution basically is that people stop reliving, and because they stop reliving, they stop experiencing the fear or the hurt or whatever it is.
So the eye movement that you're suggesting, it's not necessarily that the eye movement does a particular thing. You could do it with any type of distraction, but you chose the eye flashing.
Yeah, we do tapping actually more than eyes now.
Okay.
It's bilateral, and I don't know if it does anything really. I mean, it is part of a distraction, definitely. And does it have any other function? I don't know. There's a fellow, Siklang Wang, who has written several papers about the science of the flash technique. And he has made reference to a paper written in Japan about the neurological effect of spontaneous blinks. And there seems to be a kind of a momentary reset of the brain that happens during the blink. And so he was able to give a scientific explanation about why the blinks actually contributed to the release of the trauma memory, but it's all theoretical. And so we haven't done the research directly to verify.
Because I remember when I was talking to Francine and I said, people have a hard time moving their eyes if they have contact, if they get a headache, they're not used to, using these eye muscles. And then you also have the poor therapist's hands and arms going at it over and over and over again. And it was like, I've turned it into the tapping on the knees or the hands. And it seems like same thing is happening. And they're getting more calmer afterward and all of that. And she said, because they were attaching the movement of the eye to the REM sleep and processing in the dream, the perception was that it has a different effect. That although, yes, the tapping and the audio, whether you tap on the legs or the hands or the shoulders, or you're doing the audio of going back and forth on the bilateral, they all had an effect, but the effect wasn't as strong as the eye because of the association with the REM sleep eye movement going back.
Well, that was her favorite explanation.
Yes.
But again, we don't know really what the explanation is. It's just that, she wrote, there were 3 editions of her book, and it wasn't until the 3rd edition that she was actually able to quote research about eye movements as opposed to tapping, and the research verified that the eye movements do something that the tapping doesn't do. Mm-hmm. But again, what exactly it does,
we don't know.
That's the big question.
And you're saying as far as the eye movement that you do as a flash, which is back and forth, just kind of
the blinking
back and forth, and then you're saying that as far as you're concerned, you don't know the intricate of how it works in the neural aspect of the brain, but you certainly know it's a great distraction. So that
Well, yeah, that's true. And if the paper from Japan is a very well written scientific paper based on experimentation, and it's plausible that by sort of this resetting process, what we do know is that the part of the brain that sounds the alarm, the amygdala, it's a sort of slow part of the brain. It's further away from where the action is, where the information comes in, and it reacts. The part of the brain that I referred to, the prefrontal cortex, that actually figures things out, does the processing, that part reacts more quickly than the amygdala. And so if you get the timing right, the prefrontal cortex is reacting and resolving this trauma, but the amygdala, everything's sort of reset before the amygdala realizes there's an alarm to be sounded. And so you don't get fight or flight, you don't get a conscious experience of fear.
Yeah. Have you done longitudinal studies to know if the effect of this is a little bit more temporary and shows up back again, or is it that it's set, like when the intensity goes and it's resolved, the phobia is resolved or the fear is resolved, that it shows up, that it's done?
Well, one of our studies, we did a 1.5-year follow-up, okay. And the results really hadn't faded at all.
The reason I asked that is, I don't know if you ever knew about the Callahan technique, which started at Ph.D. and then, the Psychological Association went after him and declared that this had nothing to do with psychology. It shouldn't be. I was trained by Callahan and I really loved his technique. But one of the issues that we kept saying is that his technique is very much, and Callahan technique, for people who are listening or watching us, was tapping on the different concepts of the meridian. And he created algorithm about different phobias or different fears, about how do you tap,
where to tap for different things,
what to do with all of that. But it's in some way, it appeared that it was transitional. So yes, at that moment, it shifted something in your body, or whether it was a distraction or it actually shifted something within the meridians in order for you to release whatever you were caught in. And then, but somehow it came back. So it wasn't necessarily showed that this was a longitudinal concept, that the phobias would come back. Yes, sometimes with a less intensity, but it wasn't something that was completely kind of like dismantled. And then I know that afterward, the EFT world started with the tapping and not necessarily the same algorithm. They didn't need the algorithm. And that has taken off in a whole level, but it's not under the, psychology. It's more under the somatic, movements that you can see that. So that's why I was asking about the longitudinal study, that you're saying that, yes, in one study that you've shown that it has kind of minimized and it stayed minimized in that way.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Callahan is that he just didn't do research. And if you're trying to get acceptance from the psychological community, you don't do research, you're in for big trouble. So, Francine used to say over and over, we need the research. And she used to encourage people to do studies. And we do the same thing with flash technique. We have about 27 published studies now on flash technique. And, I mean, if you don't do the research, you just don't get no respect.
And you don't have the reasons, and you don't have the duplicity. So that's why it's important for us to be able to do that. I've developed a model, awareness integration, and same thing. We're doing case studies, we're doing research. We did QEEG. The next phase would be functional MRI. We're looking at getting the grants from NIH to be able to do functional MRI while they're going through the model and be able to do that. You're absolutely right that the research is so important for them to know. Anything else that you want to share about the flash technique? Because I think that it's...
Are we running out of time already?
No, you still have time. I just wanted to... because I can only ask questions from where my perspective is, but I don't want to miss some things. So I want to leave it up to you to bring the next question up for yourself, because I can only, based on my own knowledge, I'll bring questions from that angle, but that might be very limited. So that's why I'm opening the space for you to share.
So, I mean, we can assume that we'll miss lots of stuff. There's just way too much to talk about, but it might be helpful to talk about some of the research examples. Please. Because they're very inspiring. I have a colleague whose husband got a job in Ethiopia, and so she moved to Ethiopia, and she was an EMDR therapist. She basically retired, and there she was in Ethiopia, and there's just tremendous suffering in Ethiopia because there's been a civil war for over 2 years, and these marauding armed groups show up in these little farm villages and do horrible things. And so when she got there, she realized there was this just tremendous need, and her original thought was to teach Ethiopian therapists to do EMDR. And first of all, Ethiopian therapists tend to be much less educated than, say, in the United States, so that, you could be a psychologist and you have a master's in psychology. And so that was her first idea, and she tried training people, but it really takes a long time to train people to become competent in EMDR. And then there's a learning curve. They don't start out really competent. And so she realized that was a pretty hopeless situation, because she wasn't going to get enough people trained to do EMDR that they were going to actually have an impact on all this suffering. And so she and I think it's Esli Caravaggio and two therapists from Ethiopia developed an approach, a 4-phase approach. The first phase being stabilization, resourcing, and the second one being flash technique. And because flash technique is relatively easy to train therapists to do, and they can be amazingly effective in a short amount of time, and they can do it in large groups. And so they started training. They would send a team out into the northern area of Ethiopia, and then they would gather a bunch of therapists and they would train them. And then they'd go out and put out the word, and 100 farmers would show up for training, for treatment, really, a group treatment. And when I heard about it, and it was obviously really effective, it turned out they weren't doing any research. They weren't demonstrating the effectiveness of what they were doing. So I started twisting arms, and so they published a paper, and they have a second paper now that they're trying to get published, in which they collected the results and analyzed the results and presented the results. And it's just phenomenal. And what they find is that by the end of that second phase, where people go through flash technique, they're mostly all better. And there's still 2 more phases. The fourth phase being more EMDR-like, but in the research, they found that people really didn't need that fourth phase. They made their big shifts from flash technique. And so she's doing it all remotely now. She was going there every year. And part of the problem is that the electricity is not reliable in Ethiopia. The internet is not reliable. You couldn't really do it remotely. And so now she's found some ways to provide recordings that people can listen to, and she's moving ahead with further training. But that first paper is just inspiring. It's marvelous, and there's no reason that can't be done in lots of other countries. We have someone who is a trainer for the Humanitarian Assistance Program. That's an American humanitarian offshoot of the EMDR group, and he's over in Ukraine, going and doing flash trainings for the military there, and he's having fantastic results. I'm trying to twist his arm to get a paper written, and we did studies during the pandemic. We did one study with nurses who were traumatized by having to triage, having to treat some people and leave some people in the hall, and it's very stressful for the nurses. And so we did group flash treatment with them. The results again were excellent. Their stress was substantially reduced. As a woman, there are a lot of people in Turkey doing flash technique, and there's a guy, his name is Kanuk, and Emre is his first name, and he's a mover and shaker. He organized the first EMDR training in Turkey after a big earthquake. He got 150 Turkish therapists and trained them to go out and help people with their traumatization from the earthquake. It was a big earthquake that originated under the main sea there, the Marmot. And so, I mean, he's an amazing guy. He was originally trained at Stanford, I think. But anyway, he saw some flash technique demonstrations. He said, this would be a great thing for Turkey. Can you come and train everybody? And I said, I don't think so. It was the middle of the pandemic. And he said, well, can you send me a recording of your trainings? And we did that. We sent the recordings. He started doing trainings where people sat and watched our recordings. And now there is a huge group in Turkey doing research and a huge group doing treatment with flash technique. But we've had some great papers coming out of Turkey. One, these two psychologists took 17 adolescents who were severely depressed. There's a measure of depression called the Beck Depression Scale, and these people scored an average of 48 on the Beck Depression Scale, which is really off the charts. They were terribly depressed, and they were given 16 sessions of flash, individual treatment, and at the end of the 16 sessions, the average score on the Beck Depression inventory was just over 2, which is like way healthier than me, and so they published that. That is just a really inspiring paper, and you don't see papers like that in the world where people go in and they devote the resources to do individual treatment with a substantial group of people, and then they measure the results. So
where can people find these research papers if they wanted to go and check it out?
Well, if they go to our website, www.flashtechnique.com,
okay.
Almost all the papers, there's one place you can click where it says research, and you put in your email address, and all the papers will be sent to you, right, because it's hard to get permission to send these papers out. The journals want to charge $35 to get a copy of the paper, and so so it'd be a lot of money to see all the studies. Yeah. And so we've made arrangements where we can send copies of the papers, almost all the papers, to someone who clicks there. So that would be the way to do that.
Thank you so much, everyone. Dr. Philip Manfield, and please go check out the Flash Technique, FLASH Technique.com, and you can, gain information about all of the research and also contact you if they needed to. And you have a book around the Flash Technique out?
We're working on the book. Actually, AI is working on the book. Well, I really want to thank you for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure. I love to talk about Flash Technique.
It's been wonderful to hear it. I loved when you demonstrated it, and I called you immediately afterward and emails like, I love to have you on the show. So thank you for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure, absolutely.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.
Yeah, sometimes the mind understands, but the body still holds the stress. That's why the International Awareness Integration Institute Virtual Clinic offers mind-body services that help you regulate your nervous system, restore calm, and return to yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally. Our reflective practices include guided mindfulness, breath work, yoga, and grounding exercises, and specifically curated to support emotional regulation and physiological calm. Our somatic integration practices are a refined body-led approach where healing begins with presence, working with breath, sensation, posture, and gentle movement so resilience becomes felt, not forced. And for those who want deeper whole person support, we offer functional well-being guidance, addressing the interplay between hormonal balance, digestion, sleep architecture, and lifestyle factors with a root cause holistic framework. This is not self-care as a luxury. This is self-regulation as a life skill and a pathway to fulfillment. Choose the support your body and life have been asking for. Visit awarenessintegration.com to join a weekly meditation, explore somatic healing, breathwork, yoga-inspired movement, or functional medicine services, and start feeling the difference. Awareness, integration theory, certification programs. If you're a psychotherapist, clinician, or coach ready to elevate your impact, I invite you to become certified in the Awareness Integration Theory, AIT model. AIT is a structured, evidence-informed approach that strengthens emotional regulation, reduces anxiety and depression patterns, and helps clients create lasting change. Our training is practical, clear, and immediately usable in sessions, so you can work with more confidence and consistency. Join a global community of practitioners shaping the future of integrative mental health. Become AIT certified today. Visit awarenessintegration.com.